Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Roel and Francois.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. I'm your co-host, Roel Dionisio, alongside with Francois Vergès, who's a little under the weather. How are you doing, Francois?
I'm okay. Starting the year on the right path.
Yeah, get it out now instead of doing it later in the year, right?
Exactly.
And we have a special guest on today, Chris Hinsz. Hopefully I say your last name correctly. I always mix it up, but Chris Hinsz, he's a product marketing director from Fortinet. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing well. Thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about security beyond the PHY, right? Securing the access layer and Wi-Fi being the most prominent connection or method to get to your network resources. We wanted to go a little bit beyond just securing Wi-Fi, because security, if you don't know, you have to secure it in layers. There's different ways to secure your network, and securing it at the Wi-Fi layer is just part of the overall strategy. And so we brought Chris on to talk about security. But before we talk about security, Chris, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody who don't know who you are?
Sure. So my name is Chris Hinsz, and yeah, sorry, you did get it wrong.
Dang it.
But I've been in wireless one way or another now since 2000. I started at a company by the name of Symbol. Some people who are lifers in the Wi-Fi game might actually recognize that company name. I was actually doing Wi-Fi ASICs there. And over the years, I've been involved in the industry, both at IEEE as well as the Wi-Fi Alliance, now here at Fortinet. So I've really had a pretty long career, always loved the wireless technology. I've watched it go from something that was still being certified by a group called WECA before the Wi-Fi name took off, back when I had to explain to my parents what the heck this stuff that I was doing is, to now today, of course, my parents have Wi-Fi in their house. So it's been a fun journey. I still love the technology. And right now, of course, as you said, I'm the director of product marketing here for our wireless gear at Fortinet.
Awesome. And maybe some people don't know, you guys have your own wireless solutions, and you also have not too long ago made an acquisition of, I believe, Maru Networks, right?
That is correct. Fortinet's actually been playing in wireless for quite some time, and part of the reason for that is kind of this topic that we're going to be talking about today, and that is the fact that Fortinet is a security company. We've always been a security company, and we're, of course, best known for our FortiGate firewalls. But these customers were coming to us and saying, hey, we're constantly dropping a firewall right behind our wireless. Wherever our switch controller is, wherever we're bringing wireless and connecting it into the rest of the network, we're always, putting a firewall right there. We wish you guys we're doing more to kind of integrate with wireless, and we're being more active in wireless, because particularly at that time, but honestly, even today, they were worried about the security of wireless. And that was really the impetus for Fortinet to get involved. And they did. And from that's over 10 years ago now, they started integrating wireless into their FortiGates. They started designing their own APs. And then, as you mentioned, they did eventually acquire Maru Networks as well to further flesh out their overall portfolio and give themselves a standalone controller.
Awesome. And when we talk about security, a lot of people think in Wi-Fi, that's just encryption or pre-shared key or 802.1x. But once the user is connected via wireless, there's much more to security beyond that, because you've got BYOD, you've got your company devices, IoT devices. So we really have to look beyond just, I guess, encryption, right? And we've had we've seen the news last year talking about WPA3, how it's the next step from WPA2. Maybe you can provide us a quick recap of what your guys' perspective is from WPA2 going to WPA3.
Sure. I mean, I'm never going to that good encryption isn't a good thing, and certainly some of the changes that were made from WPA2 to WPA3, which are heavily centered on what can be done with, say, a passphrase. So that's now with the SAE mechanism as opposed to the PSK mechanism, you have a much stronger encryption cycle that actually benefits you in terms of forward security. So that it's a lot nicer in places where you are going to use a word or an alphanumeric string as your key. That's great. And WPA3 is going to be wonderful for that. It closes all configuration holes on the enterprise side with .1x. But realistically, the .1x side of thing in WPA3 is not terribly different than it was in WPA2. There haven't been that many compromises attacking that as actual encryption. Where you really see the problem is kind of what you hinted at. There's this blind assumption that, if the data on the air is well encrypted, then there's no longer any need to worry about my network. Except, as you pointed out, gosh, that's not true at all. Half the time, we all do this. We take our company laptop. We have to go on a business trip. So we're in some hotel somewhere, and we'd really like that hotel maybe to have a wired connection because we don't really like using a publicly open Wi-Fi connection, but sometimes they don't anymore.
Yeah.
So that computer's now hooked up to Hilton Wi-Fi, whatever your brand
maybe
of choice
the cafe
is,
Wi-Fi.
And you hope it's not compromised. You hope that's not somebody who's now loading malware onto your laptop. But the sad fact is you don't always know, or you're racing through the airport and you actually just need to connect for about 10, 15 minutes. And so you find a connection and you use probably should be a little bit more careful in what you're attaching to, but you don't. And then you come back to the office. Well, if you think about it, your credentials are still on that machine. You're a perfectly valid user. There's no reason why you won't go happily sailing through the .1x process because I'm still me. I'm Chris to be on the network. But that doesn't mean that my machine is necessarily safe, and that doesn't mean that I shouldn't still be watching that machine and keeping it secure. So I think one big category that isn't well appreciated is the whole idea of compromised devices, whether they are a BYOD device, a company device, or it's a lovely buzzword, but IoT really is a problem as well.
Yeah, IoT is the big one right now where these devices just aren't secure from the get-go, right? It's not about securing them. It's just about providing a solution to some sort of challenge that's in enterprise. So we do hear a lot of news about these IoT devices turning into, I guess, zombies, right? And attacking other networks.
Yeah, it can be pretty ugly. And it gets even worse when you consider that a lot of them are going to force you to then use potentially or now an SAE network because they may not be capable of .1x. And then you add on to the fact that, frankly, IT may not even know about all the IoT implementations in their site. Some of them may have been installed by facilities. They may be OT systems. Some of these IT, some of them could just be some devices that one particular group brought in because they thought it made their conference room experience better. And so if one of those things got, say, lured over to a honeypot and loaded up with a whole bunch of malware, how would IT even know? They're not tracking that. They're barely aware that it's on the network.
Yeah, they might just see it as another device on the wireless network, right? It's just another association. It's put in the pre-shared key, and somehow that communication is just secure over the air, but it's on your network.
Exactly. And so, usually we think about, when we think about any sort of protection, about making sure my authorized clients aren't lured over to honeypots in the enterprise setting. We sometimes think of that as something that would be easy to spot because IT, quote unquote, knows all the assets. And if they see one of these key assets being lured away, that's going to trigger something in any of my management systems that we hear about. But IoT world, there's hundreds, if not thousands of devices, and some of them just have piss poor connectivity protocols. So one vanishing for 10 minutes, did it get lured away, or is that just because that has a really lousy protocol stack on top of a cheapy radio?
Probably both.
Probably both is right.
But when it comes to then securing your network, and when we look at a wireless network, all that I can see is you've got your pre-shared key. Even if you're using a strong passphrase, that's great. You're using 802.1x, that's even better, but it's still on your network. There's a lot of people who don't even isolate those devices, right? We have like these weaknesses in our network when it comes to segmentation. A lot of the network devices are all on the same network. We have large network sizes to accommodate these wireless devices, or people put on a separate SSID for just those either legacy devices, old devices, IoT devices. But a lot of times I still don't see the right kind of segmentation and security at the network layer.
Oh, that's and some of this is, I think, falls on IT's shoulders, but some of it just falls on the use cases that IT is forced into. They have people coming in, and those people say have a BYOD device. I'm sure left to their own devices, IT would love to segment that away into a little walled garden that can't get anywhere. And CEO with his iPad and, no, I want access to everything, plus all the financial records. Just give it to me. And so they're kind of forced into some bad decisions. But definitely in the case of, say, like IoT devices, or like you said, so maybe a guest network, those should be strongly segmented away. And yet sometimes they're not, or that segmentation is very loosey-goosey. It's implemented maybe on one system, but it's not pervasive throughout the network. It's not it's not a configuration that is sitting at, say, a top level. It's something that's maybe configured one place on, say, one wireless access controller. And there's this assumption that that's going to propagate through the rest of the wired network when somebody's on. But that's not always a valid assumption. And I think we've all heard stories of people who are very good at, say, hopping VLANs, if that's your only, mode of security to keep things segmented.
Right. I do hear a lot of different professionals saying, well, we've got this segmented via VLAN, but then if you dive in, there is routing in between the VLANs and not necessarily access list set up or any sort of access control. And I think being part of Security Field Day last year, I would say that the biggest takeaway for me was having this concept of zero trust, where you just don't trust any device that is going to join your network. But then you have another piece of that, which is role-based access control. And I think that's important to have on your wireless network. And even when a device does connect, what do you think about client isolation? I mean, that's a feature that's there from a lot of different wireless vendors. Do you see people using that?
I think there is value into things like client isolation. I think the real tough bit about some of this is that I think a lot of times IT struggles to know exactly how they can leverage these features in their network to what they want to achieve. And this kind of comes down to something that Fortinet's been thinking about internally, which is more the idea around intent-based networking. So, it's not so much around what you actually have configured, but our understanding of what your intent of what you're trying to do with your security, so that we can actually implement that for you and let our security AI, which I think we talked a little bit about that, I think, actually at the last Mobility Field Day. Mm-hmm. So you kind of let some of that logic take over to ensure you really are getting the security you need.
How does that work? I'm just curious about the security AI.
Well, I can't go into too much detail, but the idea...
The secret sauce?
It is some of our secret sauce. But really, our idea around intent-based networking is trying to drive to a place where once we understand, for example, like you said, an approved user logs in, once we have an understanding of who that is and what you intend someone like that to have access to and what you do not intend someone like that to have access to, then we can sort of police what they're doing anyway. And this is where the AI can kind of come into play, because in the same way that you hear about AI all the time on wireless in terms of, oh, I'm going to watch the noise, I'm going to, adjust your power levels, we can look at what a device is doing. And we can start to say, for what you've told me this person, this device, this thing is, and what you intend things like that to do, it's not behaving that way.
So you have to define different group of person and the application they'll be expected to use on the network, and then you can compare?
Yeah, so once we have an idea of what this is and what it can do some comparison, and it can give you an alert. Now, this can come in a variety of different forms. One thing is in the IoT world, we can understand that, for example, if we already fingerprint that something is a printer, we can then use that knowledge to just know, okay, I know what a printer is. I don't need you to tell me that the printer shouldn't be, over here accessing some databases. There's no need for it to ever do that. So I'm automatically going to alert you that something has gone drastically wrong. But when it does come to more user-based stuff, we're going to need you to give us some level of idea of what you expect these users to do. And if you think about it, a lot of that information is already floating around out there in .1x, et cetera. So it's really tying together some of the disparate pieces of information that are available into a cohesive whole.
Can you have your system learn what the users are doing and then use that as a reference?
That's actually an interesting question, because that leads into something that we've been trying to do with our indication of compromise feature that we do that is AI backed. And that's exactly what that tries to do in terms of watching the sort of behavior that we expect from a device, keep scrubbing all the logs, seeing if it starts doing something that is new or different. This is also how we expect to catch a lot of day zero attacks, because you can't always count on the fact that all the signatures and all the known malware that exists out there is going to be recognized when something new comes in. So yes, an AI is a great way to spot a deviation from the norm, and then tell the rest of, we called our security fabric, but just tell the rest of the network, hey, this thing's doing something new and different. And based upon that, I think you might want to do something.
I think AI is going to be a big driving factor into breaking away from traditional, firewall perimeter security, because there's just so much information that security professionals need to analyze that it's almost impossible to even just keep up with what's going on, right? And I think that all kind of leads to firewalls just happen to see everything, right? And that's just one point of entry for all that data. But if you extend that to your wireless network, your APs, for example, and even start peeking at what's going on there, then you could start having AI analyze all that to be able to provide more information into saying, here's what you need to do policy wise, or here's what I need to do to move these set of devices over here and segment them out and make sure they don't touch any of this internal network resources. They only get the internet, for example. And I think that even for something as simple as setting up guest Wi-Fi, there have been a few cases where I see that the guest Wi-Fi somehow still has a way into your network resource, your internal network.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, I think you're right. And there was an article not that long ago. Maybe I'll see if I can dig it up while we talk. But that was talking about the fact that obviously the hackers and the malware people, they're actually leveraging AI right now to improve their attack techniques. So you definitely need AI on the security side, because as you said, no human's going to keep up with this. And to expect any security professional to be able to actually understand and react to everything natively on their own is just, technology has passed that by. The security professional now needs to be the guy who understands exactly what you just talked about, that I need to make sure that I have not tied together systems that I do not intend to ever be tied together. That, I think, is where the security professional really becomes valuable and really separates himself from just the quote unquote, the networking guy.
Right. And we talk as if every company has a security professional, like the security professional. And the fact is that many organizations, a lot, do not have anyone dedicated to security, and that security piece is probably assigned to a network administrator or a systems administrator who just isn't fully, grasping the latest trends and the latest outbreaks in security. And I think this is where AI is going to help at least give those guys an upper hand and be able to segment and find out how to do the proper authentication, get the right logging, and identify those trends that you mentioned. And because I did see an article, I think this is a fairly old article, but it talked about, I think it was a casino that had a fish tank, and there was a little cleaning solution on that fish tank that was Wi-Fi capable, because you can trigger it remotely if you wanted to. And somehow the hackers got onto that as a jumping point into the network and was able to wreak havoc through there. And I think that's where what we're talking about AI is being able to tie those pieces together, right? You say, well, this is just a little IoT device. Why does it have to access the financial systems at all?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's an excellent point. And you bring up this challenge of the security professional, and that's something actually Fortinet hears a lot, that frankly, there just aren't enough truly well-versed security professionals out there. So you even have companies who recognize that they should have someone, and they can't find someone with the skill set that they want or need. So yeah, a lot of times it still is falling to an IT person, and I agree. I think AI can help there. I think any sort of more intelligence that you have, as well as the more you can tie various pieces of your network into a single platform or fabric, so that you don't have seams. This has always been a big pet peeve of mine when I kind of talk to people, is really the risk that you have without somebody who's really well versed in security is that the guy configures two disparate systems, and he thinks that he's got them glued together in such a way that those two disparate systems are going to create a secure pipe. But in reality, he's got a pretty big seam between the two, and that seam may leak like a sieve. And if he's not a security professional, he may not recognize that. So the better you can have integration within your network, and that sharing of information and the sharing of configuration so that everything is tied together, the better chance you have of closing up a seam, because you really only have to configure a piece of security information one place. And then ideally that's now propagated and it's influencing a larger portion of your network. So there's less chance to have two mismatched configs that you simply, maybe as an IT guy, don't recognize.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that having disparate systems, that's now becoming less of a challenge with the introduction of APIs that all the different vendors are coming out with?
I think that's certainly helping. I think that's getting a very positive thing in the industry that's moving us in a good direction, that's allowing people to have a better way to tie their systems together. I also think that you're going to start seeing, we went through this big period where the golden rule was everybody wanted the best of breed. I'm going to buy a whole bunch of best of breed stuff, and that's going to get me the best solution. And what I'm kind of seeing is a slow move away from that. I think you are starting to see the shift where people recognize, no, you know what? I'm going to take the stuff that actually really works well together. And sometimes that's going to use some APIs that now these vendors have put together. Sometimes that's going to mean, buying multiple things from the same company, because I'm going to recognize that at the end of the day, that actually solves my issue better than trying to buy a whole bunch of things that are best of breed through some third-party analyst.
Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of high-level talk that we're talking here, because there's a lot of different pieces that you need, at least fundamentally, what you need to secure your network. I know we talked about AI. We haven't even touched upon machine learning, although I'm not even an expert to talk to machine learning, so I don't even want to go there. but but we do have these fundamental pieces I think are required to provide this concept of zero trust. And I think for one, it starts with strong segmentation, and you can either do that at the AP level, maybe with client isolation, and then even do that on your network level through your firewalls and how you architect your network.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question in that you are going to want to have some level of firewall or firewalls in place. You know, you can have things that are directly addressing your wireless, like you said, with client isolation. But I think, you know, in today's office space where people may still have conference rooms where they can plug something in and you may be moving fluidly back and forth, you really want to make sure you've got that strong segmentation throughout to ensure that no matter what happens, that you have the right segmentation everywhere. The other thing that, you know, we haven't really touched upon, but is kind of an interesting one that doesn't get thought about very often, you know, is frankly, a lot of times, even though we think about 1X as being a great way, heck, it's very easy for people, especially through social engineering, to get your name and password. So I also think it's really valuable to look into multi-factor authentication wherever possible. Try and add an extra layer so that that person who's coming into your network really is who they say they are. It is sadly easier and easier these days, and there was a Verizon breach report, I think it was the 2017 one, that noticed that some insanely high percentage of the data breaches that they had tracked came down to stolen credentials.
Yeah, I mean, that's the easiest thing to attack.
It's low-hanging fruit. And none of what we've talked about is necessarily going to solve that unless you put in some sort of multi-factor authentication. And I think a lot of times, partially just because it's got a cool name that sort of sounds very official, there's a kind of a pullback from that. That's got to also be horribly complex to roll out. But you know, there's some nice solutions out there that aren't terribly complicated. And what I'm starting to see as well is these tokens that are embedded onto a smartphone,
mm-hmm.
and the kind of cool thing that you have with that, and not that I'm going to claim that a smartphone is necessarily uncompromisable. It is. But if you think about it, a lot of these smartphones these days can unlock with a fingerprint.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you've got a token on a smartphone, you've almost added, quote unquote, for free, a second factor of authentication if that guy's got fingerprint identification turned on. So now you've got the fingerprint as well as whatever the token code came across as part of your multi-factor, which is kind of a cool benefit that you're getting, as I said, almost for free by virtue of today's smartphones.
Yeah, it's
what type of sorry, Royal. I was going to ask, what type of multi-factor authentication are you guys supporting? Or do you have any integration with the third-party multi-factor authentication? I'm thinking about like Duo or maybe the Secure ID token.
Yeah, we actually have a token product that
Okay.
works. We have it both as a desktop version as well as a smartphone version. And I'll tell you, it's actually kind of cool how nicely integrated it is with our single sign-on system. I've been impressed. It's made me a convert, quite frankly, because every place I've ever been that's had this, I have had one word for it, and that has been hassle as a user.
Mm-hmm.
But what's kind of neat is things are now getting to the stage where if I'm logging in from some remote place and it's going to require multi-factor from me, my phone buzzes. It says that there's been an attempted login. All I have to do is be able to unlock my phone and then accept or deny that login attempt, and that will actually circle back automatically and then let me in. So it's a pretty sweet and nested system. So it can be pretty painless to a user. And so again, if I look at it from my use model now, I don't necessarily have to type in a gazillion digits that time out in 3 seconds.
Right.
So if I can't type 18 digits in 3 seconds, and then I'm back to the starting point again, which used to drive me up the walls, you can come up with some pretty nice solutions that still leverage everything you need to for a multi-factor.
So on your phone, it's using like the data connection, right? It's not using the cellular connection?
It will use whatever connection it has. So if I'm out and about and all I have is the cellular connection, yes, it will squirt a small confirmation back across that. If that's not available at all and there's no connection, then yes, the numbers are still available to me. So I'm not completely hosed if I have no connectivity whatsoever. But it's a nice little extra feature to make things painless when possible.
Yeah, because I've had situations where, I have dual factor authentication to log into a website, and I'm like overseas in another country. I don't have access to my text. And, when I log in on the website, they're like, can you just give me the digits you received via text? and you have to, you know what I mean? It's a hassle, like you said. So that's why I was asking the question.
No, it's a good question. The nice thing is at least with our token solution is that it still operates like the tokens you love to hate, where I can still see a series of numbers that are being randomly generated, will time out if I need that, because like you said, I'm overseas or I'm traveling.
And I think it's this has really made it a lot easier to add another layer of security for the users, because that's the hardest part, is making it less of a hassle for users while increasing your security. And I think since everyone carries a phone, having that multi-factor authentication where it's an app and it buzzes you and you just use your fingerprint to either approve or deny that connection is as easy as it's going to get right now. And it's a lot better than carrying those things on your keychains, or you lose that little token that had the changing digits every minute or so. And we're kind of gone beyond that, and now have this utilizing something that everybody carries, which is your mobile phone.
Yeah, you're right. I would encourage anybody who maybe has not taken a look at tokens lately just because they're used to the old world, which heck is where I started off on, which was, like you said, those hardware tokens, to take a look at what's available now in the industry, because it has gotten a lot better.
And it's easier to implement with many solutions now. It's not just VPN type access. You can do it with your email. You can do it with your websites. You can do it with practically anything that allows you to add that as like a hook-in to enable multi-factor authentication.
That's correct. And so you can layer that security on pretty much any portal that you want to layer it onto.
Well, what other pieces that fundamentally to secure your network, even as it talks to Wi-Fi, what other fundamental pieces are needed?
Well, one thing I'll loop back to, because we touched on IoT a little bit, but we kind of wandered off. One implication of IoT that I think it's good to have a system in place for is something that's actually going to comb your network and tell you about all the IoT you've got. Because as we did mention, you don't always know. You think you know all the stuff people have jammed onto your network, but you may not actually know everything there is. So having some sort of system, and these days that seems to be the niche that NAC has really found in the market where it adds a lot of value, is being able to catalog all these systems, give you some indication of what the heck they are, so you actually know what's out there. Because just that visibility and understanding of what's in your ecosystem is a phenomenal first step in terms of being able to ensure that you have security for those devices. When you don't know, you have no chance in the world of being secure.
So then how do you classify what's IoT or not? Is that some sort of operating system fingerprinting?
Yeah, I think there's a number of different things I've seen from solutions in terms of either OS fingerprinting is one way. Some of it can be manufacturer information based upon, Mac information. Some of it is behavioral, watching the way it interacts with the network and the things it does, and being able to pattern match on that. Almost like, you can almost think of that as similar to virus fingerprinting, right? It's like, oh, it's doing these sorts of things, it must be this, and push comes to shove, I think a lot of these nice systems will also allow you to categorize it manually yourself if they truly can't figure it out. But a lot of good Mac systems then have as your next step that enforcement layer. So once you have categorized everything either automatically or manually, that ability to know, as we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, hey, that's a printer. There is absolutely no reason for it to be doing these things. And now that you have that understanding of all the IoT, you can check all that. Otherwise, that temperature sensor that somebody put in place, or the small motion sensor that facilities put in the back next to the loading dock, you would have had no idea what that thing was, and you wouldn't have known that it was bad, that it was accessing certain records.
So when you talk about visibility, I'm trying to imagine how that is brought to someone's attention. Is there some sort of web that shows this IoT device is accessing these devices in this network, for example? Or it's hard to describe over a podcast, but I'm trying to imagine how that would look like.
Well, I'm gonna wave my hands a lot, so that'll make it a lot better. I think there's a couple ways in which visibility comes into play. The first and foremost is these days with so much BYOD, so many things, you talk about guest networks, et cetera, we're hearing from a lot of IT folks that they've sort of given up just trying to know what all these MAC addresses on their network are. So one level of visibility is just trying to help people know, hey, that one whole sea of MAC addresses over there, that's actually your HVAC system that you maybe knew that you put in, but it's not like you had written down every single MAC address for every little temperature sensor when you installed them. Now, this is just telling you, oh, this whole sea of them, that's your HVAC system. Those are those temperature sensors. Oh, okay. Now I actually know. So this, instead of a sea of maybe 1,000 MAC addresses of which you only really have some clue what 100 of them are, that may actually reduce you all the way down to 1,000 MAC addresses, of which 875, you know what they are, and the rest are probably guest or other things that wander in and out on a daily basis, which is much more manageable. So that's one level in which I kind of talk about visibility. The second, the kind of what you also hinted at, is this idea of when something strange happens, the ability to configure for alerts, for warnings, or even tie into the rest of your network through some form of security automation via APIs, like you mentioned earlier, to block access. So that maybe I don't even have to know. You can tell me about it later. You know, tell me at the end of the day, oh, by the way, one of your temperature sensors started doing stuff that it shouldn't be doing. So we blocked that about an hour and a half ago. Okay, great.
Yeah, and I think that's important because we're not always watching logs, or people get inundated with logs, so they just don't see that one alert that came through, right? Or you just have too many emails, so you just never have time to catch it right away. I think having that auto block type feature, or some sort of policy that you have set where this shouldn't device A should never access anything in this network, then having that automatically do that for you is a huge plus.
It really is. It gives you more control over what's happening in your network, and it frees you up because realistically, anybody in security and IT, it's not your job to just stare at monitoring screens all day. You've got tons of initiatives that you're busy doing, and this gives you that freedom to go do them instead of chasing your tail, frantically like you said, scanning logs, looking at alerts, looking at every single SNMP trap that might go off. That's just not an effective use of time.
And what about an IoT device that's connected via wireless? Let's say you do have to apply some sort of policy to it. Maybe it wasn't done automatically. How do you guys envision someone taking an action on that device, say in the system, and then going, hey, there's a compromise on this device that I know of. Maybe the system itself didn't catch it. How do you guys envision, besides just kicking them off the network, maybe you want to watch that device or quarantine it somehow?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways of thinking about that. There's obviously block lists and that sort of thing that exist. But I think one of the problems that you tend to have with blocking somebody or booting them off the network is if you imagine that it's, say, my laptop and something's happened and I've got malware and I don't realize it, in all likelihood, I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes trying to get back on the network because I'm trying to get work done and I don't understand what's happening if you're just booting me off, or I'm going to try and switch to wire and I'm going to blame the wireless, and there's any number of things like that are going to start to occur, which if it's just a straight block still results in a call into IT. What's ideal is the word you used, some sort of quarantine mechanism in which, whether manually or automatically, when somebody gets quarantined, I can route them somewhere that's going to give some level of indication, usually, via some little web page somewhere, which is kind of the default we all go to, right? If connectivity starts being a problem, most of us open the web browser anyway to go see, okay, can I at least get to Google and say, hey, by the way, you are now in a little walled area. Something is wrong with your machine. This is why. You can either go here and download this utility if that's what IT wants you to do. If IT still wants you to call IT to do something, whatever the next step can be, part of that quarantine system, so that you're actually moving people more intelligently through the process. And you're short-circuiting the human behavior of try 15 different ways to get on, and potentially, especially if I'm just doing things as a block on a MAC address, recreating the whole process because my wireless MAC and my wired MAC are different.
Yeah, and I've seen people try to avoid those types of blocks, right? The wired one's a simple one because you can people would simply shut down the port, but the next step is the user goes and plugs into another port to get access. And on wireless, I guess the most simplest way, which is the most drastic, is people would just ban them from the wireless network. But I guess if you're really trying to understand security wise what's going on in your network, you would want to put it into like that quarantine or some sort of sandbox where you can monitor the activity, right? Where you can see, hey, here's what this device is doing. We don't know what's wrong with it, but there is something wrong. Here's what it's trying to access. Here are the external networks it's trying to send data to, for example. I think something like some like post analysis or analysis as it's happening is something beneficial for even bigger security teams that have a security operations center.
I think you're right. And I think quarantine as a concept is so much more powerful because of all of what you just brought up, giving people the flexibility to implement whatever steps they feel are most appropriate for a client that's in one of these states, as opposed to just bringing the hammer down and assuming it'll all work out from there.
Right, because you don't learn from that. And as in Wi-Fi, we don't know what's connecting to our network unless once we see it on the network and have the right systems that can identify what that is, whether by authentication or device authentication. But once the device is connected and let's say it's compromised, we just don't know what's going on. And I think just dropping that hammer on them and saying you're done doesn't do you any good, because what prevents the next device from having that same problem, and you just don't know what the problem is. Now you haven't looked into it. You've only just started trying to squash devices from joining your network.
Yeah, and I think the other problem that you get with that is that, particularly in any network in which there is BYOD or guests or whatever, you have no idea what half the MAC addresses in your system are. So somebody calls up and starts complaining. If you do end up on the phone with somebody, you're forced to ask them what their MAC address is, go try and find that MAC address somewhere in a ban log. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
That's a waste of the IT guy's time.
And you can spoof MAC
far
addresses
better to
too.
just be able to go look into quarantine and say, well, oh gosh, I do see somebody in a quarantine state. So when they called, it came up with some page saying I'm in quarantine. And then to your point, you can immediately go over and look in the quarantine state. Oh, how did this end up in quarantine? You're starting from a much more intelligent place on that conversation than just shooting in the dark.
And I think MAC addresses is still kind of the old way of doing it, because with wireless, I can grab any MAC address that's communicating over wireless. And then all I need to know is find out, okay, here's a MAC address that's authorized to be on the network. Let me spoof that MAC address. And so if anyone's just using strictly a MAC address filter to allow devices, there are ways around that to get on the network.
Oh, it's very easy to. And again, it doesn't get you where you need to go. So to your point, if somebody spoofed a Mac and now you have two Macs, just being able to quarantine both of them with the knowledge that, okay, I've got, something's going on here. I don't know what, but I can put it in quarantine, and at least one of these two individuals is going to contact me because it's probably just an innocent person, but at least they will have seen some sort of message. I will be able to go look in quarantine and understand what happened. Mm-hmm. Again, you're starting from a much better known position than just, I don't know, something got banned.
Yeah, and that's why I like to tell people about the whole layered security, right? You can secure the Wi-Fi layer all you want, but yeah, if somebody does spoof a MAC address and gets on your network, you better have that multi-factor authentication so that if they're trying to access some sort of network resource, they have to have the right credentials. And even if those credentials were compromised, hopefully you don't have the multi-factor compromise as well. Like just having all those different layers of security, role-based access as well, and really trying to not just have this big wall around the perimeter of your network, but making it difficult if someone was to get past a single wall.
Yeah, and that's why I appreciate you guys having me on the podcast today, and why I think this is such an interesting topic, because I've watched some of the conversations around WPA3, as cool as it is, concerned that people are walking away with this feeling, the uninitiated, obviously the people in the know not, but the uninitiated walking away going, oh, well, once I've got WPA3, then I'm done. It's better because it's a 3 instead of a 2, and then I'm back to being fully secure and I don't have to think about it. And that simply just isn't the case.
Francois, do you have any other questions? I feel like I'm doing most of the talking, but I know you're sick, so.
No, I understood that 3 is better than 2.
Well,
I got the main point, right?
You got most of it, yeah. Well, I think
one question I had is just more, since you see everything on the network, do you have a way to show some statistics on the devices that you have on your network? You maybe like X number of devices are IoT, X number of devices are corporate devices. Do you have a map that would show how the devices are spread across the network? Do you have some sort of tools that would just, take that visibility and then put it into a graphical diagram?
So we have a couple different things from our perspective that tie everything together. For us, our tie together single management platform is, and don't laugh, Roel, for the manager. So yeah, I know all the mobility field days give us a hard time about 40 blank, but yeah, so we have 40 manager, which is kind of intended as the place where all this information can come together and be tied together across your entire, security fabric. And so that would be, a place where we would be looking for, say, your 40 NAC information, all the information that your firewalls are collecting, and everything to kind of come together to give you that unified view.
So talking about all the 40 X products, I'm a little bit lost in all the products you have. Would you be able to clarify and then recap the different products you have, maybe on the access layer and then the security side, the firewall, the NAC, and everything?
Sure. So we've got so many products that I would probably blow through the next half hour if I tried to list all of them. But for kind of what we've talked about today, at the access layer, we have our 40 APs, which are the access points, as well as we do have this line of switches called the 40 switch. And those are actually managed directly by our FortiGate. So that's one big way that we offer a nice security layer so that you're actually configuring, like I talked about earlier, this idea of getting rid of seams. I can configure all of my firewall settings on my FortiGate firewall directly, and I can actually apply those rules directly onto switch ports, almost like they were a port on my firewall, or onto like an SSID, almost like it was a firewall interface. It's kind of interesting. I could make a whole firewall rule, but then apply it to an SSID. So I'm consolidating a lot of that and not trying to replicate the same settings multiple places and potentially, ending up with differences that could be a security risk. We do have the FortiToken product. So if you're looking for multi-factor, we have that. We have an authentication product in the form of FortiAuthenticator. We also, if we didn't get too much into endpoint protection, but if you wanted to have, say, an endpoint protection product, we have offerings in that sense with FortiClient, and we've actually seen a lot of people valuing that in like education, because we even have a Chromebook version that can run on those. From visibility into IoT devices, that's where we really see our FortiNAC product slotting in nicely. It has a lot of ability to auto-categorize a large number of IoT devices and then integrate and propagate some of that control information that we talked about earlier. I mentioned FortiManager, kind of a nice over-the-top thing for aggregating a lot of this information. So we have a lot of the pieces that would be necessary. And as we kind of talked about this move in the industry in general to a lot more platform and fabric approaches, that's where Fortinet really is trying to drive this. We see this as the kind of the next generation of network security, that all of your network is going to be working together in a concerted effort to communicate, share information, and protect your necessary assets rather than as a jumbled mishmash of product.
Thank you, Chris. One technical question. Do you need FortiNAC if you want to do 802.1x authentication? Or do you have like a radius inside the FortiGate or inside the FortiAP that allows you to do it without having a FortiNAC?
I do not need FortiNAC to do authentication. If you want our radius server, we have one with FortiAuthenticator. We do have some user-based controls also built into the FortiGate itself, depending on what you want to do. So, for example, some of the single sign-on stuff that I talked about, that would be a place where we would recommend using FortiAuthenticator. So if you wanted to say a site-wide single sign-on where everybody could just use their credentials for all the systems within a company, that would be more of like a FortiAuthenticator kind of thing.
And if you want to do EAP-TLS?
That would be a good FortiAuthenticator kind of thing. Okay.
And I had another question. Can you access the FortiGate, or can you manage everything from the cloud?
You can. So FortiGate can be managed. We actually have VMs of FortiGate. So if you wanted to actually install it as a VM directly, you could do that. If we have the FortiCloud solution, which allows for management of FortiGates through a cloud interface. So if you want to do your config, push everything that you wanted to do from the cloud, you can do that with FortiCloud onto your FortiGates.
I was just thinking of like smaller companies or smaller customers where you just want to install one firewall, one AP, or a couple of APs, and just be able to help them remotely manage it from the cloud.
Yep. And that's exactly the idea behind FortiCloud. And there's been a little bit of talk about maybe renaming FortiCloud just because the name is so generic that people don't always immediately guess that it can manage FortiGates. So there has been some talk about maybe renaming it like FortiGate Cloud so that people understood that allows you to directly manage your FortiGates.
FortiGC.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you for joining us on the show and talking about security beyond the PHY. I think it's an interesting topic because it's not just about pre-shared keys and 802.1x and WPA3 just because it's a newer number. And there's just much more to it. And like you say, we can keep going on and on about going further into security. But for those who want to learn more, where can people find you online and maybe any resources that you can lead them to?
Sure. So anybody who wants to reach out to me, I'm on Twitter at CSH_OTA. You can also reach out directly to me at Fortinet. I'm C Hinsz, that's CHINSZ at Fortinet.com if anybody wants to reach out to me. We do also have on our Fortinet webpage, which is just Fortinet.com, actually some good materials around, some of the topics we've talked about, kind of creating a secure wireless network. So the best way to find that, there's a pretty long URL for it, but the best way for folks to find it, we have a whole page of solutions. So if you go on to the Fortinet page and you kind of mouse over and look at solutions or Fortinet.com/solutions, you can find a number of our solution topic areas. And one of those is creating a secure wireless network. And it talks about all the layers up that we've talked about today.
Awesome. And we'll also include a link in the show notes just so everyone knows how to get there.
Perfect.
Cool. Well, I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode. And Francois, I hope you get better. Maybe drink some more tea.
Thank you.
and Chris, thanks for joining us. And we look forward to hearing what you guys think about wireless security. I think it's a topic we don't discuss enough about. And so if you have any questions, head over to the show notes, cleartosend.net, and leave a comment, or you can hit us up on Twitter at cleartosend. Other than that, we hope you guys have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye, guys.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks.